All right, here we go.
I don't have access to see.
They're all coming in.
It's lovely to see your faces pop up on the screen, much more dramatic than having people drift into a large room. We're going to just wait and make sure everybody that's trying to get here has time to arrive. Lori or Laura, do you think we're here?
I think so, Bishop. I think so. Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm going to use the mighty gavel. And call this adjourned session, the late session of the Legislative Assembly of the Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference to order. And welcome all of you. People of God, here we are again. And yet every time we meet, it's a different community. People come and go. Some are unable to join. Others choose to skip one. Others may be here for the first time. And our lives have changed since we were together on April 23rd and 24th. So as we begin, it's good to pause and just take a minute and look at the faces on the screen to see each other. And to say to one another, even just in the silence of our hearts, I see you. I'm glad you are here. I wonder what good God can generate out of the people and the relationships in this meeting. And I want to invite you specifically as our kind of opening devotional practice today to take a minute to look at the faces and to let one face kind of capture your attention, draw you to it. Now, you don't have to tell the person that you're looking at their face, but pick one face. You maybe somebody you know well and haven't been in touch with for a long time, maybe somebody you've never met. Find a face that speaks to you and calls your attention. Now, this is an interesting exercise because that person doesn't know that you're picking them, which gives you a certain freedom and anonymity in this exercise. So let yourself gaze at the person's face. A thing I have done a few times in gatherings like this is to take my finger. I don't have a screen that I can reach here, but take my finger and touch the forehead of the people in the meeting. So if you wanted to do that, that would be okay, and the person wouldn't know you were doing it. And I want us to breathe. And as we breathe out, to let yourself let go of what you think you know about the person that you've selected, the person that you've partnered with. The little judgments that we make when, if it's somebody you don't know, when you meet a new person. And as you bring in, I invite you to let yourself wonder, how was this person's day? What burden do they bring to this meeting? How has God touched their life and brought them to this gathering at this time? So let's take a minute and begin by, so breathe in quick. We'll begin by breathing out to let go of the preconceptions. And breathe in. What do you wonder? Breathe out. Breathe in. And I invite you to offer a silent blessing for that person as I say aloud these words. May the peace of Christ be with you. May God's Holy Spirit watch between thee and me this night and as we lead the Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference in the days ahead. Now, God, we pray that the work before us, yes, the legislative work before us, might be holy work, that we might use this time and this way of decision-making and leading to be your ministers for this work, baptized by the Holy Spirit and water, to build up your church, to bless your children, and to grow in love and knowledge of one another and of you. Come, precious Jesus, we pray. Amen. All right, I'm going to introduce three of the key people who have made it possible for us to gather in this way. There are many more than these three, so you'll get to meet some of the rest of them in a few minutes. I didn't introduce myself. I think you all know me. I'm Elaine Stanowski. I'm the Bishop of the Greater Northwest area. And I'd like to introduce Lori Day. Lori, if you want to wave at everybody, Vice Chair of the Legislative Assembly and Director of Connectional Ministry and Assistant to the Bishop for the Oregon-Idaho Conference. Adam Burdell and Ruth Marsh, the two of you want to wave? Legislative co-chairs for the annual conference. And finally, Laura Jaquith Bartlett, conference secretary. There's Laura. We're noticing love is pointing right at Laura's right ear. You got the love tonight, Laura. And with that, I turn to Lori Day.
Thank you, Bishop. I just want to offer a couple more announcements or introductions, for you all. So first is Sally Blanchard. And many of you know Sally. She is our project and office manager for the conference. And so she will tonight, she's monitoring the chat and the live stream and just is available if anybody needs some additional help and support. Also, Kristen Caldwell is our communications manager. And so she's here also for technical help and a variety of other things should needs arise, and taking care of some of the behind the scenes things also. And then up at the Pacific Northwest Conference office with Bishop Elaine is Tyrone Olds, who is providing tech support behind the scenes for her. And then also Rondelay Gabwat, who is Bishop Elaine's executive assistant. and she's there supporting us also. So we are appreciative to the Pacific Northwest Conference for hosting Bishop Elaine on our behalf and for their staff that are helping to make this happen tonight. I also want to mention that this is being live streamed, and so people are able to see and hear what is going on. So just wanted everyone to acknowledge that that is happening too. Thank you.
All right, we turn now to our Secretary, Laura Jakewith Bartlett, for the roll call.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who were present at the April Legislative Assembly, we'll be doing roll call the same way we did that day. Those of you who are here as guests, presenters, will not be calling your names during this time. We're looking to identify the voting members of the Legislative Assembly. So I'm going to call the names of all voting members, some of whom will not be here. But if you are here, I'm going to ask you to respond to my calling your name by simply saying out loud what your role is on the assembly. Are you here as Sage District clergy or as Board of Ordained Ministry representative, or whatever your role might be? And I'll give you a little heads up. I'm going alphabetically by last name. So as you sense the alphabet moving towards you, you might want to go ahead and unmute and be ready to answer. So here we go. Scott Allen.
Sage District Clergy.
Mark Bateman.
Representative of Council on Finance and Administration.
Mike Benischek.
Cascadia District Rep.
Laura Beville.
Cascadia Clergy.
Sharon Bryan.
Sage District Lay Leader.
Dave Childress. June Fothergill.
Representative Commission on Religion and Race.
Ria Gallo.
Crater Lake District Lay Leader.
Warren Light. Carter Liebeck. Cynthia McLeod.
Columbia District Lay Leader.
Larry McClure.
Conference Board of Trustees.
Dwayne Medicine Crow. Steve Mitchell.
Conference Board of Pensions.
Ted Myers.
Columbia District Clergy.
Jan Nelson.
Conference Lay Leader.
Julia Nielsen. Tom Orquiza Renardo.
Columbia District Clergy.
Amanda Gale Reed.
The Order of Elders.
An Board of Ordained Ministry representative. Ben Scranage. Brenda Seen.
Sage District Clergy.
Funga Taufu.
Representative from Commission and Race.
John Tucker.
Cabinet Representative.
Donna Ward.
UMW Representative.
Suzanne Wardenar.
Laity, Columbia District.
Wendy Woodworth.
Cabinet Representative.
And maybe MLT representative.
Oh, maybe MLT representative. That's it. I think
we'll
that's
take that
the first
one. Kaylin Wooldridge. Ruth. Oh, and that was the end of the voting representatives, the voting members. Thank you all and welcome.
Thank you. So Adam, are you going to give us the overview?
Happily, yes. Thank you all for being here. For members of the Legislative Assembly, there is a link to a Google Doc in the chat. That's an important resource. I recommend you go ahead and click on that and just get that browser window close at hand and easy to navigate over to. It's that Google Sheet that's just an important way for all of us to communicate with each other, a way to make motions, to get recognized, to submit amendment texts. If you've been asked, or if you are shortly asked to help shepherd some legislation tonight, the text of the motion, Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of. You'll find that language ready for you there in that Google Sheet as well, so you can kind of effectively help us move through our work this evening. Ruth, jump in, please.
Yes, I had a question about that. So if there's a place for my name and information about myself and then what action I want to take, if I wanted to take one of these actions, do I have to fill this out every time? Or do I just fill out my name and my last name and that information would stay in there?
You should, every time you want to be recognized, go ahead and fill out that line. We'll be, as we address things, we'll be deleting content out of there. So yeah, anytime that you want to be sure to kind of get in the queue, just like you might line up at a microphone on the floor of annual conference in a big hotel ballroom, this is our kind of electronic version of that. And so just encourage you, you can test stuff out over there. Feel free to do that too. We'd appreciate you not quite yet move us to adjourn. It's still a little early in the evening to field that motion, but feel free to, if it'd be helpful to you to test out that spreadsheet, that's fine. We'll keep it cleared out as appropriate. When it comes to voting, we'll be doing it pretty old school, raising hands, and Laura and I will be counting. So when it comes to that, keep your hands raised as long as you can until we tell you to drop them, and we'll be taking the vote that way. It'll be important for non-voting members of the Legislative Assembly to go ahead and turn your video off during votes. Makes it a little easier on the counters. And then if you're here tonight as a presenter, welcome. We're so glad you're here as a presenter. After the presentation time is done, we'll probably invite you to go ahead and exit the Zoom, and you're welcome to keep engaging with Legislative Assembly over on the YouTube channel. But the fewer boxes we have in the Zoom, the more confidence we have in our vote counts. So if you're a presenter for one of our pieces of legislation tonight, thank you for being here. And we'll let you go over to the YouTube channel after the presentation pieces are done. Any questions?
I see Scott Allen.
Yes, I'm confused. When we talked about how to access the information on Google, I didn't quite catch all that. I'm sorry.
Sure, Scott. If you navigate over to the chat on the Zoom there, and you might need to scroll up a little bit at this point, but there's a link there, umoi.org/getrecognized. That's the link you want to click on. Yep. And that'll take you over to the Google Sheet.
So Adam, do you want somebody to run a test through?
Oh, let's see. Bishop, are you looking at that screen now?
I always have the Google Doc up.
So yeah, you should be seeing it here. So
I have so many screens, I could get lost. It's like a house of mirrors. Sometimes Rondale has to stand up and wave her hands to get me to look at the right one. Oh, Adam Burdell. Is moving the conference fund ice cream socials for every local church in the month of August. I rule that out of order.
Never fails.
I rule it in fun though. Out of order in fun. Okay. Thank you. So that's how that'll work. And I'll try and keep my eye on the Google Docs so that I can call on you when I need to, when you need me to.
Thank you, Bishop. Right. Thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to have some presentations from some of the legislation we're seeing for the first time in this meeting tonight. The order is not terribly important here. So since I don't see Karen Hernandez yet on the Zoom, Steve Mitchell, would you be prepared to say a word for a minute or two about our AR-15? You can unmute yourself. That will be good.
Yes, I will. Do people have AR-15 before them? It might be helpful if you can find it. Now, can I find it?
You know, Steve, that's a great question. And why don't we just pause for a second and ask, is there anybody in the meeting that has not been able to access the documents that we're going to be considering tonight? Ted? So I think in the chat, there's both Kristen and Lori may have posted links to the documents.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I have 17, 18, 19, the ones that were posted on the email, and there's 15. So I've got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had trouble myself, so. Good. All right. Go ahead then, Steve. Thank you for making sure that everybody's got what they need.
Helpful to know what we're talking about.
Yes, it is.
And that may be making a great assumption myself. This action request was developed by the Rules Committee on behalf of the Conference Personnel Committee. It establishes a new rules section regarding vacation and other leaves. And you'll see that it's a new section called Chapter 14. And the purpose of this was that the Personnel Committee felt like we should sort of clarify and standardize across the conference, especially how we figure out what vacation time is. And also they were concerned that the clergy who are appointed to work in the conference office needed to be part of the personnel policies also when they don't conflict with the rules of the conference and the discipline. So that led to also clarifying sick leave and family leave or paternal leave and personal leave. And so there's a whole series of rules related to those in this action request. One of the interesting things to think about is how do we figure out a month's vacation time for clergy, which the earlier rule basically just said, in fact, that may be a disciplinary. And the Personnel Committee wanted to clarify you can't take 30 Sundays off, but rather I think that the number 24 days was taken by taking 2 days a week off or 8 days a week off. 8 days a month, considering that 2 days off is a normal thing. So you take from 31, 8, and you come up with 23. And of course, sometimes there are additional days. So the number 24 work days, I think, is the important thing to note there, and 4 Sundays per year. The rest of the rules propose sick leave, 5 work days or 40 hours, paid but non-accumulative. Personal days, 2 days per year, paid but non-accumulative. Maternity and paternity leave do have some things to be considered out of paragraph 355. There is a time you need to request it in advance, and we are suggesting up to 12 weeks with 8 weeks paid for maternity or paternity leave, the first 8 weeks. And family leave, of course, caring for family members with medical needs, and achieved in this similar ways to the procedures in 14.04, the proposed rule. But you won't need 90 days advance notice for approval. And then general rule 14.06, if there are other circumstances that require leave, they would be developed in consultation with SPRC, the DS, and the Board of Ordained Ministry Executive Committee. Then the final proposal is just simply that the clergy appointed to conference staff do follow conference personnel policies when they don't conflict otherwise. That's a quick run through that.
Thank you, Steve. And so just to recall, we're not acting on this at this point. We're asking questions, having kind of a little bit freer conversation about this proposal, and we'll come back to it later for action. I'm right about that, right, Adam?
Yes, so there is a question in the Google Sheet.
Hooray! Laura Baville. I'm curious if the disciplinary rule Laura, I'm going to ask you to present your question.
Yeah, I so did not write a complete
That's
sentence.
okay.
I'm so sorry, Bishop.
Right. We're oral people, so speak your question.
No, I also have a kid crying now, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, just bear with me for a second. So the renewal leave, is that part of that other section? Because there's a disciplinary option for renewal leave for clergy every 6 years. So I'm wondering if that falls into that other that needs to be negotiated, or if we should articulate that in, or if that should be articulated.
That's a good question. That one I didn't see. And certainly those procedures would, in fact, I don't even know if there's a rule on renewal leave. That may be something we can do in the future, but just work through the procedures as they are now.
So unless Steve, unless, because we're not really in a legislative session, I'm going to be a little freer than I am sometimes. Unless the discipline isn't adequate, doesn't give sufficient guidance, we don't need to add to it if it's adequate. Nothing we can do can conflict with the disciplinary provision. I think these others, it's often the case that the discipline has general rules, but how you apply those in specific cases is a little bit vague. And I think that's what your committee's trying to address. Isn't that right?
Yes. Yes.
So Laura, nobody can take away your renewal leave, right?
No.
Well, no, I wasn't saying that. I was just, the discipline is pretty clear regarding maternity leave.
Yeah.
And it's reiterated in that. And I'm wondering, I was just curious why it wasn't reiterated about renewal leave also. That's all.
That didn't come up.
Are there other questions or comments?
See, June Fothergill has a question.
June, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at my, oh, well, Fumile has a question too, or Fumile wants to move previous question, but that's a little, I'm just going to say it's premature for that. Fumile, we're not on action request number 16 yet, but we're going to come to it, and you'll be able to make a motion then. June Fothergill, you want to state your question or your comment?
I was a little confused, Steve, by your explanation of the 24 days. It sounded like you included the 2 days off, assuming a 2 days off schedule for people every week. Is that, I'm confused. Is the 24 days in addition to a normal kind of 2 days off a week, or is it the 2 days off a week included in your 24 days?
The 2 days off are additional to the 24 work
Okay.
days.
All right, thank you.
All right, Wendy Woodworth.
Yeah, I was curious how you arrived at the number of sick days at 5. I could give my editorial, but I'd like to hear how you arrived at that first.
That's a good question. I think that looking at other ones, I just came up with that through other policies and looking at state law.
Okay, I just had an opportunity to ask somebody who does HR in the nonprofit world, and the standard is 7 hours a month, which comes out to closer to 10 days. So this is just somebody who works in HR in the nonprofit sector. So I was curious how you arrived at that number.
I think I did that by looking at state law.
Okay, it honestly feels low to me.
So this is the point in the conversation where you, Wendy, or somebody else might be jotting notes to yourself about an amendment you'll want to bring when we come back to it for vote. Are there other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, maybe we can move to the next.
We have a request to go ahead and move to a presentation for AR 18 to accommodate some presenter schedules. If that's agreeable, we might hear a word about AR 18.
So Karen Rodriguez, I think you're the presenter for this. You need to unmute.
Okay, thank you very much, Bishop. Hello, everybody. My name is Karen Rodriguez. I am here. I serve as the Congregational Development Chair. And this evening, the work that you have before us is actually a joint effort with the other chairs of the Congregational Development boards and teams across the Greater Northwest. Since that has been the case, I decided to go ahead and invite David Reynolds from the PNW conference and also Erin Day from the Alaska conference. And so we will be doing a little presentation, hopefully faster than 2 minutes, so that you can all understand what you have before you.
Karen, if you'll pause for just a moment, I want to test whether this petition has an attachment, refers to a document that's attached, and I don't happen to have that, and I wonder if everybody else does. If everybody else has it, we're good. Okay, proceed then. Thank you. I certainly have it elsewhere. I just don't happen to have it in front of me right now.
Thank you, Bishop. Okay, so I'm going to invite my brother in Christ, David.
Thanks, Karen, and thank you, friends, for inviting us to this and allowing us to present this petition to you. I was elected to start and provide the history. I think that's probably because I'm the oldest of the three. And I do have a bit of corporate history with congregational development in the PNW. I've been doing it for about 6 years. But I want to start with more recent history. Last September, as some of you may know, a letter was presented to the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference during a discussion on the budget with our CFNA group. And that letter was signed by some 150 lay and clergy people across the area, including Oregon-Idaho folks. I want to say about 50 of your folks signed that letter. And in the letter basically was asking about the work of the Innovation and Vitality team. I'm hoping most of you know what that is. But needless to say, questioning the funding for that group, how they made decisions, the process, and kind of just wanting more information on, I think what generated most interest was the rather large budget that was presented by the IV team right before annual conference in the PNW. So the result of that letter was the formation of an ad hoc working group by the bishop, which myself and Aaron and Lori and John and several others were part of for about 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months in March, a rather lengthy report called A Plain Account on, quote, work of the IV team was presented. And I'm hoping that if you don't know what that report had in it, you can find it. And I think Aaron is prepared to give you a link to that report if you need it. But that's a good background on sort of the history of of innovation and vitality across the area over the last several years, and sort of how we do our business these days. In that report, it stated that the next step was going to be the drafting of legislation to bring to annual conferences this year that would form something called the Vitality Council. In other words, we would go from our individual congregational development team and an Oregon-Idaho Board of Congregational Development in PNW and the Vitality team in Alaska and form something that was more area-wide, with primarily the approval for funding of new church start projects and vitality projects in existing churches. We met with the bishop, we talked about it. She kind of gave us her vision for what she would like to see. She wanted to keep this moving, so she helped provide some impetus to bring this before you today. But as we started to discuss trying to put together legislation, we ran into a problem. And I'm going to let my sister Erin talk a little bit about what some of the issues were that immediately came up when we thought about drafting legislation for approval this year, and why we want to go with something that looks a little bit more like a work in progress. So Erin, could you take it from there?
I'd be pleased to. Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Day. I serve as the chair of the Alaska Vitality team, and I want to thank you for allowing me to be here with you this evening. As David said, it became pretty clear that there were some lingering questions, even questions that the plain account report points to, around some things that needed to get squared away before we were really in a position to move to an area-wide governance structure for congregational development. And some of those were just clarity around roles and responsibilities, who is doing what and when and how, and what the mechanisms are for accountability, who the stakeholders are, and what processes are currently being used. It's taken quite a bit of effort on the part of the innovation and vitality directors to figure out how to navigate 3 different conferences with 3 very different structures and different ways of doing things. And it seems like we needed to have a better handle on all of those questions before we could confidently say even that a Vitality Council is truly in the best interest of all of us. And so we decided that maybe there was an intermediate step that needed to be taken, that we needed to do a little research, that we needed to potentially do some problem solving before we could bring legislation for a Vitality Council to the table in all 3 conferences. So it's pretty clear that we need to have a culture of innovation and vitality embedded across our connection, across our Episcopal area. And in order to do that, we need some clarity around what's already happening so that we don't accidentally recreate some really dysfunctional systems. That's not what we want to do. And we wish to develop a very healthy space for innovation and vitality projects to flourish in connection to the institution, but not defined or hampered by the institution. And so that is the task that we have set before this commission, the Vitality Commission that we propose creation of this evening. And as I said, it's pretty critical that we do what we can to avoid the mistakes of the past. And in order to do that, we need some fresh voices at the table and a new perspective to come through. And I'd like to invite Karen to share a little bit more about what we've envisioned there.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you, David, for the explanation. So part of the new voices that we probably need to have in our white predominant institution, that includes people of color, right? BIPOC people and people that are actually LGBTQ2 part of the community. Because as a person of color in this white predominant institution, right, we have seen also many instances where we feel as chairs that we can create also part of that inclusion. And so part of what we are trying to do is that the people that are actually appointed to this group also include people that are BIPOC, and we're talking about 6 people clergy, 6 people lay, definitely BIPOC, part of the LGBTQ community, and also to include church planters. And the reason why we want to include church planters, well, or they are also part of the they're actually the hands-on people, right, that are doing all of this really important work. So it's also part two of who we want to be, right? The Bishop Elaine has been talking this last couple of years about how to dismantle racism in our institution and in our local churches. And we understand that the work is long, and part of that is also to make sure that we also own that in our own realities too. We understand that communities of color are growing in our communities, and that also resembles to in our churches. And in our churches, we definitely have a lot of people of color that have the tools and the requirements to bring forward. So with that being said, I think that's our little, probably 5 minutes of presentation that we have prepared for you.
We're happy to entertain any questions that you have about the petition or anything else that's on your minds.
So this is the time for general questions and open discussion, and we'll come back and vote later. I asked Leroy, I don't know if you saw it, I just texted you and asked if you would enter in chat the explanation of BIPOC. You know, each year at annual conference, there's new use of language, and we need to be a learning community. And so if we just make sure everybody's speaking the same language on this, that'd be helpful. Or maybe you want to say a word. You want to, and I'm not sure Leroy's the best person to do this. A variety of people could do. Karen, why don't you do it since you're not talking anymore?
So definitely we're talking Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? That's what that BIPOC means.
Thank you. I don't see any hands. I don't want to move too quickly. All right, and yes, Ted, you're going to have to unmute.
Do you plan on continuing to meet via Zoom as you gather and as you continue your work?
Erin, you want to take that one? We talked about that earlier, and I think you had some good thoughts on that.
Sure. I think we envision the commission doing most of its work virtually. We would be hopeful that the commission would be representative of all three conferences in some way, which would make meeting in person fairly challenging. And I think we've all realized during this COVID time that we can do good work virtually. But we've also considered the possibility that the commission might choose to meet in person at some point along the way, and that would be up to them to discern whether that was an appropriate step. Does that answer your question?
You know, an interesting question that I don't think we've addressed. Maybe it's been discussed among the directors of connectional ministry, but this is a group that could potentially need funding, and I don't think we've gone through funding processes on it. So that may come up at some point. Just name it. It's not a surprise to the DCMs, and money is not our biggest constraint right now, but it is a constraint. So.
Bishop, the chairs had a conversation about that as well, and the three of us are very happy to divide the funding equitably among our three teams, because we feel like that's an investment that's definitely worth making.
And that's right there in the proposal. I see lines 40, 41. Thank you. Any other questions? Then thank you. I don't know, Aaron and David, if you're able or want to stay to the time that we'll come back and actually have discussion and voting or not, but I see Ted's hand up again.
Yeah, I can always come up with a question, Bishop. So especially for the Alaska Missionary Conference, is there an effort to get some folks involved in some of the more remote villages in Alaska on this team? I'm thinking of primarily Indigenous folks in some of the villages.
I think that would be up to the bishop as she does her appointive work. But I think yes, in a perfect world, that we would absolutely include some indigenous voices from Alaska, and there are a few younger leaders that would be really well suited to this sort of thing. So yes, there are some options here, and there are some really strong indigenous leaders that are in PNW and also in Oregon-Idaho, and so I think the bishop will have her pick of some really fantastic folks.
Mark?
Thank you, Bishop. I guess my question is just to confirm that this is not envisioned as a long-term governance and accountability structure, but as a planning and strategy structure for a relatively brief time, with then potentially some recommendations around long-term governance and accountability and what those structures might look like. Is that a correct read of this?
Yes,
Karen?
Mark, it is. You're right.
Yeah,
on the money.
you nailed it.
Yep.
That's it.
And they won't have any supervisory authority over IV team or anybody else. They're independent. They make recommendations. They're going to come back to the bishop, the cabinet, and to our respective teams with their ideas. And then we kind of see where it goes from there. Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, it looks like we've exhausted for the moment the comments and questions. You'll have another chance when we come back and have the motion actually before us.
So Bishop, this is David. Would it be helpful for us to be available during that time, or are we just going to be listening in? You really don't need us.
Well, let's just ask Karen that. Karen's really the person representing CDT from Oregon-Idaho. Would you?
Yeah. Thank you, Bishop. I would be okay if David stays, as well as Aaron. I find that the work that we are doing we're doing it as one. And so it would be great if they stay too. I'll try to stay too as well. Yeah.
Okay. We will be happy to. Thank you.
Nobody has a problem with that, do they?
Bishop, it'll just be important that when it comes time to vote, we have non-voting members of the Zoom turn off those cameras.
Yep. Thank you for that reminder. I jotted myself a note about that too. We'll see if I remember it. Not that I'm going to turn my camera off. I don't even have a way to turn my camera off.
We are prepared to go back to the top of the list and hear a word about AR-14, and John Tucker has expressed a willingness to share that word.
Okay, I am willing. I thought Karen would do that, but okay. So AR-14. So this has to do with it says no clergy person may hold their charge conference relationship where a family member is currently appointed. And I believe this is being brought, this is kind of one of those rules to take people off the hot seat. In most cases, that's probably not an issue, but there are a few cases where that would be an issue. And so we're seeking to standardize the practice across the board so that a superintendent is not on the hot seat regarding that decision, I suppose. So that's what I know about that action request.
There's a link to AR-14 in the chat, I see. So this is the time for general questions, comments. Not seeing anything. John, you did a great job.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, John. Let's not go too far with the unconditional positive regard for John Tucker. That's dangerous, very dangerous. But we can.
Isn't he your DS?
Oh, darn. Yeah. Well, I'm in for it now. Let's invite Jim perhaps to say a word about AR-16. In my packet, that's on page 4, support for the Alaska omnibus proposal. Jim, you available to unmute?
I am unmuted, I hope. Yes, my name is Jim Depkin. I am a member of Oregon-Idaho Conference as of last year, and I am serving in Alaska, where I am the clergy delegate to the general conference that just can't seem to happen. So the Alaska Omnibus proposal springs from a concern that we have the Christmas Covenant and the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace kind of competing to some extent for press and PR and perhaps votes. Also a concern too that the Christmas Covenant, while we look forward to the church that it envisions and do appreciate the decolonized approach in which it was written and submitted, we're concerned about the 2/3 supermajority required to pass it. And for reference, there are changes to 26 out of 61 paragraphs of the United Methodist Constitution in the Christmas Covenant, and that has been a concern looking at the state of the United Methodist Church and our divisions, mirroring to some extent the divisions politically in our own nation. That coming up with a supermajority to agree upon everything is pretty challenging. So the Alaska Omnibus proposal tries to address certain things. One, it's an omnibus proposal, meaning it takes from other proposals. There's very little in it that is new, and I'm sure you've each read the 70-page document that is the proposal. So not much is new. It takes the Christmas Covenant things that do not require a supermajority and includes those. It also includes the protocol as a way of saying we need to have some way to without fighting, to allow those that wish to join whatever traditionalist model of Methodism might evolve, to do that without litigation, and just all the fussing and the fighting that happens. We did have a small group of 10 people engaged in the writing process, and we know that is not representative of the larger church. But in that group, we did have 6 clergy, including 2 deacons, 4 lay, including 2 deaconesses, people that have had their membership in other conferences and in the greater Northwest area, and also 1 who has membership outside of the US. So even in that small group, we had some diverse voices. And so the main concerns that we would have for the omnibus is not necessarily what is submitted with it, but the pitfall is potentially having the administrative managers of the agenda for a general conference basically saying that you can't submit anything beyond the date of when things were originally submitted for 2020. And that is a concern going forward. However, even if that is a concern, because it pretty much takes what's already submitted, there's ways for it to be put together. So I will speak personally that from General Conference 2019, I walked away very wounded personally. I wept greatly one day as I lamented the state of the church and also my LGBT daughter and what the church looked like. And the thought of fighting for votes on the conference floor to get that 51st vote, or with the Christmas Covenant, that 67th, seems painful to me. And if we could get a proposal that allows us each to move into the church that we envision, and that maybe by passing the Alaska Omnibus, the other parts of the Christmas Covenant that would require a supermajority now could be much easier to be passed if we have a way for the more traditionalist folks to depart. And that's kind of where I think we come from. And again, there's a 70-page document, but the 3-page introduction is I think pretty good, describing sort of the heart of the proposal.
Right, you've heard that introduction, and God bless you, Jim. You are way deep in the weeds on this stuff, and I suspect there are several people in the Legislative Assembly that are not living and breathing this the way the delegates are. So we're grateful to all of the delegates and others that are concerned that are tracking this for us. But you may well have questions, I'm guessing. Are there questions or comments? All right. Nothing on the. I
I
heard.
was so very clear and concise. There are no questions.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bishop. We'll continue just sort of in the numerical order. I believe Carlo is on the Zoom to perhaps say a word about AR-17.
Thank you, Adam. And good evening, friends. I'm calling to you from Eagle River, Alaska. And I want to just start out by acknowledging that I am living and working in land, unceded land belonging to the Dena'ina people, and eternally grateful for their stewardship of this land. In a little bit of background of what another acknowledgement would be that this request is coming before you officially through Jim Depkin, who is the member of the Oregon-Idaho conference. I don't believe I have the standing to bring this before you, to bring this properly before you as a body. So I want to acknowledge that too. In 2019, February 2019, the Alaska Conference in a special session approved two pieces of legislation of action. One is to petition the General Conference, the upcoming 2022 General Conference, to dissolve the missionary conference status of the Alaska Conference, and then to petition the Western Jurisdictional Conference to redraw the boundaries of the Western jurisdiction so that Alaska would then be included within the Pacific Northwest Conference. To the end that the envisioned structure would be that what is now the Alaska Missionary Conference would be a mission district of the Pacific Northwest, according to paragraph 415.4 of the 2016 Book of Discipline. Obviously, with the pandemic, the two decision-making bodies that need to enact these pieces of legislation have not met. And so Alaska finds itself in a liminal space of wanting to move forward to what could be, but is being held back by those decision-making bodies. And so in this annual conference session coming up, we are proposing that we live into what could be, that we live into what it means to be a mission district of the Pacific Northwest Conference in advance of the official actions, and let the general church just catch up with us. And so we're going to explore what it means to connect to PNW. We're going to explore what it means to align our systems. But more importantly, we are going into this relationship wanting to name the values, wanting to name our non-negotiables, acknowledging that the past of the Alaska Missionary Conference is laced with abuse and colonization. And so we want to enter into this new relationship in a decolonized way, wherein it is the smaller system that names the terms in which the relationship goes into. So where does the Oregon-Idaho Conference come in? We are part of an Episcopal area. And so we would like to invite you, our siblings in the Oregon-Idaho Conference, to pass an action of support, that you support your siblings up north in this action, and for us to be able to model not just to ourselves, not just to the Western jurisdiction, but to the denomination, perhaps a decolonized way of coming together and shifting structures. And so we come to you for support in this regard. I'm ready to take questions if there are any.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the Google Doc and I'm not seeing anything yet. Are there hands of people? Laura, Jake with Bartlett?
I do. Thank you, Bishop. And with apologies for not using the Google document after I tried it out earlier this evening.
All right.
Should have done that. This is purely a logistical question and more for Jim probably rather than Carlos as the presenter and or rather as the petitioner. He may not be aware that we have a rule in Oregon-Idaho that states that any action request that that asks or demands, as the case, as you might interpret it, for someone to write a letter, and I have to say that's usually the conference secretary, part of that petition must be to provide that the text of that letter. So that's kind of a reminder, but my clarifying question is that as I'm reading the paragraph about how this will be carried out, it sounds to me like after the vote of Oregon-Idaho on the 21st, that letter needs to get to the conference superintendent of Alaska before the 22nd. Am I interpreting that correctly?
So yes. So I think and the letter. I mean, yes, we can provide you the text to the letter, but it could really be an email just saying we approved the nomination. It gives what's envisioned is as Alaska because of how our annual conferences are scheduled. I mean, it would have been great if Alaska made the decision first and then Oregon, Idaho, and Pacific Northwest made their supporting decisions, right? But because you all are going to gather first, it would be great to be able to name that after we, as an Alaska conference, do our part. And so,
okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question, Laura?
It did.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions or comments? All right, before we move on, I just want to acknowledge that you heard Carlo Rapanut preach at the Eugene Annual Conference, and may have seen the notice in the last week that he has consented to serve as my assistant to the bishop for the area beginning July 1st, in addition to continuing as Alaska superintendent, but we're going to spin off the DCM role in Alaska, and we'll have an announcement soon on how we're going to do that. So I hope that you'll get to know Carlo. And I saw Jan's enthusiastic. Good, thank you.
thank you, Bishop.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Bishop. We have one more presentation on a new action request scheduled for this time, and that should come from Leroy Barber, I believe. He can unmute himself.
Good evening. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now. There you go.
Yep.
So you should have received the report and this action item. I'll go over the report really quick, just in case folks didn't get a chance to read it. So this report was done on May 27th, 2021. And it was called, there was a group of BIPOC leaders that came together after an initial meeting organized by Lori Day, the DCM in Oregon, Idaho, around setting some work or some legislation for anti-racism to meet the bishop's challenge and for that to happen this year. And so that group met, and after that group, during that meeting or out of that meeting, there was a request for the BIPOC leaders that were a part of that to have a meeting together in which they can set and voice some of the agenda that they thought would be important for this group to consider, with the caveat being, if this was for anti-racism, that the lead voices should be the BIPOC persons in there, and the group consented. And then I was asked to pull that meeting together. We met on the 27th of May, and I presented a process that the group accepted, and that was kind of 3 or 4 steps. The first step being, what would you like to put on the table to the conference to do as its anti-racism work? Everyone was invited to put on the table, if you will, their thoughts about that. And then the second round was to answer yes and to what they heard. So I heard this from this particular person, and I would like to add to that or emphasize that. And so the second round was a yes and emphasis to some of the things that were voiced. Again, everybody was invited to participate. And then the third step was for me as convener to read back, to articulate for input from the group what work we had just done with those first 2 steps, and if there was a consensus around what we had just done. A consensus was met, and then I explained a process that organizers have picked up from the civil rights movement, and this process was to name what they call the core lie, and what they call and combating that with the spiritual truth. And so the example would be, for that civil rights movement, the core lie was that Black people weren't human, and the spiritual truth was that all people are created, and is that all people are created in the image of God. So as an example. And so the group came to a consensus around this core lie idea, and that was that the BIPOC persons and leaders in that group felt that what they were experiencing was that they were not enough as they were, and that we are somehow broken and we need to be fixed, managed, or taken care of. And you'll see also in that report is some further reflections off of that. And then the spiritual truth being that the truth of Scripture and the theological the tradition that they were part of is taught that they were more than enough, and that they were conquerors in Christ Jesus, and Christ has proclaimed them worthy just as they are. And so therefore, out of that, you see the following pieces of what was put on the table. So given that work, and then I'll say a final piece was the ending of that was that this was a consensus work, and that the BIPOC leaders that attended wanted this to be presented as a community. And that is an effort that there aren't repercussions to BIPOC leaders and pastors who are serving and don't have control of this public document, and so their names on it might individually might cause some repercussion. And so that's why it ends the way it ends, with a group consensus of BIPOC leaders. So out of that, the action that you see before you out of that is coming from a BIPOC group of leaders and members of the Oregon-Idaho Conference. Mostly members of that conference were present with a church planter as well. The Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference, the action is to receive this report from its BIPOC leaders and members of your conference, to acknowledge its contents of the report and the realities of BIPOC members and leaders within the Oregon-Idaho Conference, and commit to working towards a just resolution. The request is that the ministry leadership team be assigned to this work with BIPOC leaders and members of the Oregon-Idaho, and they develop an action plan by November 30th of 2021 based on a report submitted, and that they report back to the annual conference in 2022 around what the plan is moving forward. That was really quick. Any questions?
It happened pretty quick too. You got right on this. So are there questions for clarification or comments on what you've heard? Jan?
Sorry, I didn't use the form either. Laura set a
Okay.
bad example. I want to appreciate this and say that I was present at that meeting earlier, and I left the meeting feeling like, did we ask the BIPOC leaders to do what they've done here, or did we send a message that it was up to them to fix this? And I really appreciate what came out of this. And I know that as white people, we have a whole lot of work to do, but I'm really grateful for the work that the group led by Leroy has done, and hope that the people of color and the white folks can work together and somehow put the responsibility where it needs to be, but have the voices heard that need to be heard.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you.
Bishop, I believe that concludes our planned presentations.
Okay. So let me ask you, Adam, can we work through 2 hours, or did you envision a break?
We didn't have a break in some of our sketched out rundown, but breaks are always good.
I tell you what, let's go to the old business and maybe look, see if we can get through that before we take a break. Is that acceptable to everybody? All right, so let's go to the next break point in our script.
Thank you, Bishop. But just as a reminder, this group did wonderful work back in April. Some of the action requests that we worked on back in April were referred to various other teams to come back to us at this meeting. And so when you hear us talk about old business, that's what that's referring to, our action requests that we hoped a team might do a little work on and come back to us with some more information. And so this is work that's going to be involving votes. And so if you're not a voting member of the Legislative Assembly, nothing wrong with turning off your camera. That's going to make our vote counting a lot easier when it comes time to take some votes. And I believe we have Mark Bateman prepared to move our first bit of old business, which would be a return to AR4.
So see if you can find AR4, which is in that original packet of material called Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference Legislative Assembly Report 2021 that I found on the conference website.
So much good stuff on that website, Bishop. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, hard to find sometimes, but it's there.
It's on page 7 of that packet.
Thank you. So Mark?
Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 4, calculating unfunded pension liabilities.
All right, is there a second? You can't have a break if somebody won't second this. Thank you, Steve. It's properly before you now. So this is the time when we debate, amend, make our arguments for and against this legislation.
Bishop, this is Larry McClure, part of the trustees' discussion on this issue as requested along with the Board of Pensions. And we do have some additional comments to add here, even though we support the concept of Jim Fellers and he's agreed to several of these points. Dan Wilson Fay is here tonight to interpret some of that if this is a good time for that.
This is the time.
Okay, Dan?
So should I say something or should a substitution be moved first?
Probably a substitution. I have a note
Okay.
that somebody's bringing a substitution, but I'm not, is that
Yes.
you, Larry?
Yes, I will do that. I would like to propose a substitution to AR4, and it would be called the Local Church Disaffiliation Agreement Template.
Okay, and people, so let's make sure people have this. Who can help us know where we would find this?
I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Great. Let's give people time to follow that link. And, you know, I just saw Laura Baville's question. Did we get this today? You got too much, too late. I got too much, too late this year. And there are all kinds of reasons that none of which are adequate. We apologize for the lateness of much of the distribution. Some of it is genuinely late breaking. But I've been concerned, a number of us have been concerned all along that there was going to be too much new material for you to feel comfortable with. So we'll try and give it the time that we need while we're here to make sure that everybody's on board with it. But okay, so has everybody found the substitute, which is called substitute for AR number 4? That I think you found through the link in the chat. Is that correct? Okay, so Larry, tell us about it.
I'm going to turn that over to Dan, though. He has the details.
Let's see, Larry, did you move the substitution?
Yes, I moved that.
Okay, so is there second to substitute? I see your hand, Steve. Are you seconding the substitution? Thank you. Thank you, Steve. So the substitute, the motion to substitute is before us. And let me recall that substitutions operate in this odd way where when the motion to substitute is before us, we end up with these two motions before us at the same time. The original AR4 and the motion that Larry's trying to substitute. And we're going to have to decide which of those two will be the main motion that we discuss and act on. And after we decide which one's the main motion, then we debate it and vote on it. So it takes multiple steps. I just want to alert you to that so you don't get lost in this. So right now what we're discussing is, do we want to substitute Larry's motion for the original AR4? So Larry, back to you.
Okay, are there any questions?
Now the substitute is long. Mark, please.
So can Larry or Dan provide a summary of what's different between the substitute and the original?
Go ahead, Dan, please.
Yes, thank you. The action request number 4 was an attempt on the part of Jim Fellers to address a piece of the legislation that was passed by the General Conference of 2019 that addresses the steps for disaffiliation of a local church from an annual conference. The disaffiliation process is much more complicated and involved than the particular piece that Jim's legislation was intending to address, which is the calculation of a local church share of an annual conference's unfunded pension liability for when a church exits the pension system, if you will. And so in 2019, this paragraph 2553 on disaffiliation was passed by the General Conference. However, there were challenges to that, and those challenges were not fully resolved until April 16th of this year, when the Judicial Council finally ruled that the paragraph 2553 is indeed in effect. Part of the paragraph 2553 is that the General Council on Finance Administration puts forth a document, a template for a disaffiliation that guides the trustees, the conference board of trustees, in their agreement with a local church who requests disaffiliation, and lays out the items that need to be covered in that negotiation. An annual conference board of trustees is able to add other elements into that negotiated a document that's signed between the local church and the annual conference. And so our board of trustees did that on May 10th of this year. And they also responded to the request of the Legislative Assembly to look at action request number 4, which was part of this larger disaffiliation document. So for all intents and purposes, the proposal that Jim Fellers made in action request 4 is incorporated in this disaffiliation document. And I had conversation with Jim Fellers, and he is not in disagreement with it. The language in the disaffiliation document just tightens some and clarifies where we get the numbers to do the calculation. But the concept, Jim was in full agreement with. Also, the Board of Pensions of the conference also approved this disaffiliation pension liability calculation formula. So both the Board of Pensions and the Board of Trustees are in agreement on that piece of it. But the disaffiliation template is something that guides the annual conference trustees when they address the matter of a church that may request disaffiliation. And so it's placed before you by the trustees and ultimately by the before the annual conference as the understood guidelines by which a church would be in negotiation regarding a disaffiliation.
All right. It's no surprise that dividing a large international centuries-old institution is complicated and painful. So here we have an attempt to bring a tool to use, guidance and a tool for what to do if a local church wants to disaffiliate over the LGBTQ, over the human sexuality issues that are dividing the church. So the motion to substitute is what's before us. Is there discussion of that motion? It's a motion to amend by substitution. Mark, did you want to say anything more?
No, Bishop, I was just trying to facilitate conversation.
Thank you. All right, are you ready to vote?
Bishop, there's a question on the spreadsheet.
No, not on what I can see.
There's a question from Wendy Woodworth.
Okay. Don't know where that is. So hold on, let me see if I can find it. Oh, there it is. Sure, Wendy, you want to ask your question?
Yes, this might be more of a technicality in just the way this is written, but when I started reading through this and you get to A and you get to 1, local church shall pay blank in exchange, I was almost thinking that there's going to be a market value there. then it says it's based on the stuff that follows it. So it just seems like there should be, instead of it being I and double I and 3 and so on, that's a whole separate subset that makes
Can you just give us at least the page you're on, because there are multiple A's and I's?
I'm at line 22. So if line 22 is to be based on everything on line 24 through.
Hold it.
Over to the next page. It needs a slight, just needs a slight.
You're on page 3, line 22?
I don't know.
I know.
This is a long document. I'm at the,
where it says local church shall pay, and then there's a
yes,
blank.
the payments. I'm on the, yes, the church's obligations. So it's just a little confusing the way it's outlined. I is not a separate amount. The very first one on line 22, it's based on the stuff below it, and that's not clear. It almost looks like you could have an amount for I that's like a market value of the property and all these other things. And I don't think that's the intent.
So who can explain to us how this form works, how it's intended to be filled out? Is that a question for you, Dan?
Sure.
I think just like at line 24, if that double I became a new set of A through whatever for all of those things, that then create the number for the line 22 above it.
Well, so this template comes in this form from GCFA, but it is exactly what it says. It's a template. And there's going to be information that is put in and negotiated by the local church requesting and the annual conference. But I will say that where it says in AI, local church shall pay blank in exchange for the right to retain its real and personal, that is actually it leaves open the possibility that a local church will have to pay to receive the property. Many people have understood this legislation 2553 to say that a local church doesn't have to pay to retain their property, but it actually does not say that. And so this just leaves the door open for that negotiation to go on between the conference and the local church to pay some amount if that is agreed upon.
Okay, so that is a separate number plus everything else where it says subject to the following terms, everything below that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Ted?
Maybe a question for Dan. Dan, are there standard formulas for those lines so that?
Ted, let me interrupt. I really shouldn't be allowing us to debate this because we haven't decided to substitute it yet, right? So let's hold these questions. Are you ready to vote on substituting this motion, this petition for the original AR4? All right, then let's go into voting mode. If those of you who are not voting members of the assembly would stop your videos to help us with the counting.
And we also need to make sure that voting members turn their videos on.
Oh, thank you. Those of you who are voting members and want to be counted, please turn your video on. And I don't think anybody's here by phone or. All right, are you ready? So if you would substitute the substitute motion for the original AR4, please raise your hand and keep it up. All right, all down. Those opposed, lift your hand. Are there any abstentions? All right. Do we have a report?
Thanks, Bishop. Laura, I counted one abstention and everyone else voting in favor. I don't have we're gonna get a good number here. I don't have that yet, but that's
Yeah,
my
it's
sense of the vote.
19 in favor, 0 against,
One abstention.
and 1 abstention.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so the substitute for AR number 4 has been substituted. It's now the matter before us. And Steve, was it you that I just cut off? Who did I? Oh, it was Ted. Thank you. Ted, I recognize you. We're now discussing the merits of the substituted motion.
Thank you. Question for Dan. Are the formulas standardized for figuring out the amounts that go into those blanks? In other words, is it fair for every congregation? Do they have a standardized formula that you're working on?
Well, for the pension liability calculation, yeah, that's a figure that can be determined depending on what the total liability to the annual conference is as of a certain date.
For AI, especially that.
No, there is not a standard formula for that.
How would you figure that?
Well, that would be up to the, so this is negotiated by the annual conference board of trustees with the input of the director of connectional ministries, the conference treasurer, the benefits officer, the conference attorney, the bishop, and the cabinet. And so all of those bodies have to weigh in, and they would negotiate, if you will, on the conferences side of, what do we do? Do we charge 10% of market value? Do we have an appraisal done and take 5% of that? Do we do 50%? So all of that is just a negotiation. There's no standard number that's put in there.
Is that negotiated per individual church then?
Yes, every disaffiliation agreement is going to be a separate negotiation.
I think I'd feel better if that were a standard formula specifically for AI, that the bodies come up with a fair formula for all congregations, rather than dealing with each congregation and their properties. That's just something that I think could be, I wouldn't say abused, but maybe really misunderstood if one church had a really good deal and another church didn't. So anyway, that's my concern. That's all I have on that. Thanks.
Scott?
I agree with Ted's sentiment, but I think that the uniquenesses involved in the variety of situations and circumstances our local churches are in would really prove that any kind of formula would not be adequate.
Thank you. Is there more discussion? I'm not seeing more discussion. Are you ready to vote? All right, then. If those of you who are not voting members would stop your videos. And all who would approve, all who would vote affirmatively and vote yes for AR number 4 as substituted, please raise your hand. All right, all who oppose, would you raise your hand? Are there any abstentions? All right, do we have a vote?
We have 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions.
All right, so the substituted AR number 4 has been approved. Thank you. That took a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So I wonder if we want to take a break. And let me ask you, before we do that, Adam, do we need to poll the group about its ability to stay beyond the 8 o'clock adjournment hour if necessary?
Well, if April is any indicator, we tend to really hit our stride after the first couple.
Okay.
But we may go to 8:15. That may not be unrealistic. We're ready for AR8 with Cynthia McLeod, maybe when we come after a little break. So
that's what I was thinking. So your challenge on the break is to take care of your bodily needs and to get ready to hit your stride. And we'll come back at 1/4 till the hour. That's not good. Yeah.
Friends, be sure to mute yourselves as you go on break as well, so that you're not hearing side conversations on the live stream.
All right, there's about a 4-minute spread in the clocks I can see from here. So we're gonna reconvene. And Adam, are you taking us to AR8? Is that what I heard? Yes, with Cynthia McLeod.
That's correct. Cynthia's prepared for that.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure. So what exactly am I supposed to do now?
This is the Bishop, I move the adoption language.
Okay. Okay, Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of AR8, Conference Rule 1.034.
All right. Is there a second? I see a second, Mark Bateman. So this is before us. The floor is open for discussion and debate. So this again is old business, and it may take us a moment to recall. Yes, Steve.
There is a substitute motion. I'm not sure we talked about who was going to do that. Lori and Laura developed it.
I think Laura Beville's ready to make that substitute.
Okay.
Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly substitute the motion for Conference Rule 1.034, the proposed new rule as was sent in our email today. Is that how I'm supposed to say that?
All right, so the motion is to substitute. And even before I ask for a second, I'm just going to ask for certain how these are were not easily identified in the way that they came through to me. So Laura helped us know that the rule number is 1.034, which shows at the top of the sheet that is before me. Does everybody see where we are? Okay, then I'm going to ask for if there's a second to the motion to substitute. Steve Mitchell has seconded. So this is properly before you. Laura, you want to say a word about why you would substitute? And it's proper. The motion to substitute is before us. We're not discussing the merits of the rule. We're discussing whether or not to substitute the rule. So Laura, you want to say a reason why you would substitute it?
Because I was asked to by Adam.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're doing your job.
Our conference secretary is prepared to say a word about this and the substitute for AR9.
I will speak to AR8, and you might just have this exact same explanation in mind when we get later to AR9. You may recall that these two rules were brought to us. That the intent is to enable greater participation by both pastoral leaders and lay participants, lay members of new faith communities. That there was kind of a glitch though between the intent and how the rules ended up getting written. And so they've been rewritten to allow within the constraints of United Methodist polity for participation, both by pastors or laypersons who are serving pastoral roles of new church starts, new faith communities, as well as persons within those communities.
Thank you. So is there discussion about whether or not to substitute the rule for the original AR8? Are you ready? We'll go to a vote. Those of you that are not voting members, please stop your video. If you would substitute the conference rule 1.034 for the original AR8, please raise your hand. All right, those who would vote no, raise your hand. Any abstentions? Same sign. Right?
The vote is 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 against, or
Thank
0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
Thank you. So the rule has now been substituted for original AR8. And this is the rule 1.034, and it is before you then for discussion and debate. All right, are you ready to vote? If you would adopt conference rule 1.034 as presented, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, the vote is 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right, so rule number 1.034 is adopted. Thank you. And we move now to action request number 9.
Jan Nelson will help us with that motion.
Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of action request 9.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mark Bateman seconds. It's before you for debate.
Bishop, just to save a little time. And since Cynthia and Laura set such a nice model for me and took away all of the doubts, I move the substitution of the language in the email today, conference rule 1.035, to be substituted in place of AR9.
Thank you. Is there a second to this motion to substitute? Mark has seconded. So the proposal to substitute the new rule for the original AR9 is before you. Is there discussion? Seeing none, if you would substitute, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
$20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
So I get the feeling that we've chased everybody that isn't a voting member or one of the kind of officers of the assembly away. Is that pretty much true? I didn't ask that time for people to stop their video. Adam, do you think we're beyond needing that?
I think that's fine. I see a lot of non-voting members are still in the room, but they are keeping their video off.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good. All right. So then, good. We're doing well. You're right there. We hit a stride here, Adam. Let's see if we can keep it up. So my note, and I guess this was because there was a new version. Are we on then report AR 12?
And John Tucker's prepared to help us get there.
Thank
We
you.
moved, we voted a substitute. We haven't voted on it as the main motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Gosh, I don't have a parliamentarian today. All right, so my apologies. So we're still on the substituted rule, which is rule number 1.035. And if you would support, is there discussion of rule 1.035 as proposed? Seeing no discussion, if you're ready to vote, if you would support Rule 1.035, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, the vote is 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions.
All right, so it is now, Rule 1.035 has been adopted. So now we're going to turn to AR 12 and John Tucker.
Thank you. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly refer action request number 12, amending clergy housing standards and policy, to CFNA and Cabinet for further research and conversation.
All right, you hear this motion. Is there a second? Mark? Oh, that was a second. Sorry, excuse me. So the motion is to refer. If you would refer, well, is there any discussion? I honestly didn't go. I
can speak to it if I need.
Okay, please. Thank you.
So I do appreciate this action request for two primary reasons. First of all, it is about caring for our clergy, which is something that all the district superintendents value and think is very important. And it gives us an opportunity to gain some understanding and clarity in an area where I think we need it. But as this request is presented to us, it raises a lot of complicated questions that we don't have the answers to. It also relies on a policy that is no longer in place in the annual conference. And so I think we really would benefit from some further conversation around questions such as, when is a church-owned home a parsonage? Because churches can own houses that aren't parsonages. So we need to get to the bottom of that.
All right, thank you. Is there further discussion? Laura?
Sorry, John, could you repeat your motion one more time? I got the gist of it, but I just want to make sure I get it exactly.
Okay, I move that the Legislative Assembly refer action request 12, amending clergy housing standards and policy, to CFNA and Cabinet for further research and conversation.
And I saw Jan's hand.
Bishop, can the Legislative Assembly refer, or do we have to recommend to the plenary session that it be referred?
Steve Mitchell, my unofficial parliamentarian, is saying he thinks that we have to take it to the annual conference. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Is that your understanding, Adam?
Perhaps reluctantly, yes.
So, John, you moved referral. Is it your intention to change that motion to recommend that the annual conference refer it?
Okay, I need some guidance on this. I would recommend that it be defeated. And if that's the, that's the referral is what I was told to do, because it does need conversation. Whether we want to have this at the conference level, I don't know, but there's a lot of stuff here. So Mark, I would invite Mark Bateman if he wants to help me out with this.
So John, the problem is that if we defeat it, it still goes to the annual conference. So,
okay.
But I think it's a stronger message to say that the Legislative Assembly recommends that the annual conference refer back to CFNA and the Cabinet.
Okay. So do I need to rephrase my motion?
So everybody's been listening in. Is everybody clear about what Mark and John just negotiated? Can we kind of by common consensus understand that the motion has just morphed to become a motion to recommend to the annual conference referral of this petition to CFNA and Cabinet? Okay, everybody seems on board with that. So that's what's before us. We have the mover and the seconder on board with that. Is there further discussion?
I'm not a voting member, but I think if a shepherd, as long as a shepherd says this is what happened at Legislative Assembly, that there was that we wanted it referred, I think that there needs to be a way to tell annual conference that that's what what our intent is. And I think we're doing that, but I want to make sure that it's clear that somebody needs to stand up in front of the group and say, Assembly would like this referred. Does that make
Right,
sense?
is that, so Ruth, you're just saying that when, I mean, we have to report out on this, right? And so I'm not sure what you're worried we might be doing instead.
I just want to make sure that we clearly report out that we looked at it and that our recommendation is to refer it, because typically it just says, you know, we voted XYZ. And so the shepherd gets up and says, you know, we recommend this action, you know, to pass it or fail it. And I want to make sure that we have a shepherd who is prepared to say, we thought it was best to refer this.
Okay. So Adam, will John be the shepherd for that, or somebody, who's the shepherd for this when it comes to annual conference?
John would be welcome to. We'll and we'll balance that with other kind of conference responsibilities if he's still the right one.
Okay. Okay, so this is before us. The
Bishop.
Yeah.
So just so that we're all clear on this, is with this action, would it require a motion to refer, because there would be an affirmative motion to adopt the petition at annual conference, and our recommendation would be to refer, and therefore someone would have to actually move from the floor to refer? Or does our recommendation become the motion to the annual conference?
The motion that John presented was a motion to refer. And what we did by consensus was to shift that from a motion to refer to a motion to recommend that the annual conference refer.
And that's the motion that will be before the annual conference.
I believe we never had a motion to adopt this petition. Is that correct, John?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, so we can't we can't be under obligation. The Legislative Assembly can't be under obligation to recommend a petition that it hasn't.
Right, but I think that addresses Ruth's concern.
Okay, maybe I'm missing your point.
That if the motion before the annual conference, because it came from us as a motion to refer, that's automatically what we're reporting on.
I'm missing something here. I just don't get it. I thought that the motion that's before us right now, by common consent, is a motion to recommend that the annual conference refer action request 12 to CFNA and cabinet.
Right. So the question in my mind is, what's the actual process when we get to the plenary session of annual conference? Is it a motion from us that will read refer, or is ours a recommendation to the annual conference that's just a report out against what would be made as an affirmative motion to adopt, and our recommendation to the annual conference is that they refer?
So so let me see if I understand. The question is, do we bring the motion? Does John say, upon recommendation, upon action of the Legislative Assembly, I move that the annual conference refer AR 12 to CFNA and cabinet?
Right,
or,
because the parallel is, even when we recommend defeat, it's still an affirmative motion to the annual conference. The motion on the plenary floor of annual conference would be to adopt, and our recommendation would be to defeat. And so we would hope, as Legislative Assembly, that the body would vote no. we don't move defeat, that they would vote yes for.
I get
And
that,
so-
but for whatever reason, my mind is dull and I'm not seeing the analogy here. So John, are you clear what motion you're putting before the Legislative Assembly right now?
Yes, I'm clear.
So,
because I don't know. I mean, I kind of see what Mark is saying, but I guess I'm good with the wording.
Which wording are you good with, Mark?
With
or John?
Recommendation of referral, because otherwise, Mark, then don't we? I mean, then it's our only other options then are to defeat or approve. And
I'm just trying to make sure we're all clear what steps the annual conference is going to go through. I know what's about to happen here, or I think I do.
Right.
But I want us to all understand the steps that are going to go through. We're going to go through on the plenary floor of annual conference.
So let's just play this out. If John says, based upon action of the Legislative Assembly recommends referral of this petition to CFNA and Cabinet. If that's the motion, then we debate that. I put it before the body. The body says, yes, we refer, or no.
But it's not the Legislative Assembly recommends. Will John say, I move the referral?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I make the same. So you're asking, do I make the same motion there that I've made here?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm sure you're onto something, and it's late in the day. So thank you for pushing for clarity. Is everybody that's going to vote clear? All right. If you support asking the annual conference to refer this petition to CFNA and Cabinet, please lift your hand. All those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
That was a persuasive discussion, Bishop. 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right. You all are voting as a team. Okay, so I think, Adam, we're on to new business.
That does take care of the expected old business this evening. And I believe Scott Allen's prepared to help us get started with AR 14.
Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 14.
Thank you. Is there a second? I see Steve seconding. Thank you. It's before us. Is there discussion? Do you want to say something about it? Do you want to just remind us what it is, Scott?
I think that, no, I'm really not prepared with the substance of it.
Okay. So this is regarding clergy members holding their charge conference in the church served by a family member. All right, I hear no discussion. If you would support action request number 14, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, I counted 19 in favor, 1 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right. Action request 14 is recommended to the annual conference. All right, we're ready for 15, Adam?
Mike's
I
ready.
have that. I got that one.
All right.
Mike Benishek. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of AR 15, new conference rules section on vacation and other leaves.
All right. Enthusiastically presented. Is there a second?
Right here.
All right. All right. I see Fungale seconding, and I see June seconding as well. So this is before us. Is there discussion? Scott?
I think that Wendy made a good point about the 5 days being inadequate for sick leave. And so I would like to make an amendment, if it's appropriate, to increase that to 10 days.
Is there a second? So let's make sure we know where that's being, where you're proposing to add this. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. All right. So we're on line 26. Is that correct?
I have 14.020.
Okay. And so you would, you're substituting, you're striking 5 and adding 10, or substituting 10 for 5. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Is there discussion? Ted?
And the hours that follow from 40 to 80.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. By common consent, we'll correct 40 to 80 to take account of that change, proposed change. All right, is there discussion of the amendment? Yes, Mike?
Just out of curiosity, can we conflate 2 rules together instead of having sick leave and personal leave? There's a lot of state laws that have to do with sick leave, and if we have a sick leave policy, then we have to follow Oregon and Idaho sick leave laws, I think. Can we just call them can we just conflate the 2, call them personal days, and people could take them for sick days or for bereavement or take care of your kid day? Can we? That's what I'm going for. I'm trying to get away from having all these delineations of leaves, and I just love just a bank of personal days.
Great question. Laura Beville has a thought.
So I believe when we were looking at this policy, as we were hiring our new musician who's coming in a couple of weeks, bereavement has to be, it's listed separately by state law, at least in Oregon. So if we include that in personal and sick leave, we have to make sure that it follows the state law for that. Just
yeah, I think
an extra layer of complication.
If we have so many personal days that count for sick days and bereavement, that supersedes it. I'm just trying to get away from my church having to count which days I'm off and just.
For which purpose? So is Dan Wilson Fay still here? Is anybody here from Personnel Committee? All right, we're just going to have to use Lori Day. All of you that have been muted, we can't see you. It's our stopping video. Yeah, we don't know that you're here. Thank you, Lori.
I think this gets complicated real quick. Personnel employment law is challenging, and so I would say that the Personnel Committee has wrestled with this to a certain degree and has been challenged by it. And I think that amending, while it is could potentially be helpful, it also might have some ramifications that we do not fully understand. So I don't know what you're looking for in terms of from the Personnel Committee.
So Lori, does your comment apply to Scott's amendment from 5 to 10 days, as well as the question about combining categories?
Probably not. I need to confer with the discipline. Some of this was about bringing the policies, the conference policies, in line with the discipline. And offering that as a benchmark, because part of what's happening is also trying to get clarity around the conference clergy in relationship to the lay staff, the conference staff that are clergy in relationship to the conference lay staff.
All right, so what we have is a motion that's been seconded to increase 5 workdays to 10 workdays and 40 hours to 80 hours. What do you want to do? And we had a comment from Mike Benishek about.
I'm good to move on. I was just trying to stop all the.
I just didn't want you to feel like we hadn't heard you. Okay, so the amendments here, and people can scramble before. We've got some days before this is going to come. Whatever we recommend is going to come before the annual conference. We can invite the personnel committee to weigh in if the legislative committee goes in a direction that doesn't make sense. So is there further discussion? Then if you would approve the amendment, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
Okay, so action request 15 is before you as amended. Is there further discussion? John?
Is this the right place for me to speak against?
Yeah.
Okay, so I speak against this. I think it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist, and especially if it's only for the Portland conference office people, then I have a real problem with it. But this is an example, another example of the erosion of the way pastors are respected. In my opinion, as a district superintendent, I have more trouble getting my clergy to take their vacations than I do with clergy overtaking them. I think this adds a more transactional relationship between pastor and churches. If your church is counting your days off, then I think there's a problem. And so I think this is a bad idea, and I think everything's working fine as is, and the discipline spells out the leaves adequately enough, and so I oppose this.
Thank you. Is there speech in support of the action item? You ready to vote? If you would support AR 15, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
Bishop, we had some non-voters on that particular call. We have a count of, I have a count of 4 in favor, 13 opposed, 1 abstaining.
All right. And Laura, that you confirm that number, those numbers? Okay. So action request 15 is not supported. And we should just note that I suspect there's a conversation that might need to happen between the Personnel Committee and the Board of Ordained Ministry about what led to this petition, and if there are things from the Personnel Committee that need to be tended in a different way. Well, thank you for your careful attention to this. So we will report that as indicated. All right. We
Bishop,
are.
I believe Pastor Funga's prepared to move us to AR 16.
Pastor Fungale put his motion on the Google Doc as instructed long time ago. So Pastor Fungale, please bring your motion.
Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommends to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 16, the Alaska Omnibus Proposal.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? You guys are kidding me. Thank you, Steve. Oh, Brenda, I'm going to give this one to Brenda. All right, anybody that hasn't seconded something, you got to get in line because we got to move through this this work. Thank you very much. So this is before us. Is there discussion? Seeing the, oh, Jan. Oh, and Mark. I see Mark and Jan.
I did fill out the form, Bishop. I
Oh,
just
thank
have
you.
to
Yes,
say.
you did. I apologize. I apologize.
As much as I appreciate the work of my friends in Alaska, and I know their delegates and I know how hard they've worked on this, I have to speak against the recommendation of our conference supporting this proposal over others. In our previous session, we had a petition, which I brought actually, in support of the Christmas covenant. And I think people fairly appropriately said, we just don't know enough and we don't want to bind ourselves yet. And so we amended that to be a study. And I think it is premature. The Alaska Omnibus, I understand what they're trying to do. I've heard various opinions on whether it would be constitutional and whether it would do what it intends to do. It may turn out to be the best way forward, but it may not. And I just don't want us to go on record as supporting it at this point.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? In particular, is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of the petition? Any? Yeah, Mark, I'm sorry. I said I was going to call on you and then I didn't.
So I paused because I'm not speaking in favor. I just want to remind people briefly about a conversation we had at the last Legislative Assembly in April, again, about the Christmas Covenant petition. A lot of discussion on my part about not wanting this to end up on a consent calendar. And Adam and I were just exchanging texts that confirmed, and I may have missed this, none of our actions this evening will end up on a consent calendar, which means anything we do ends up in full discussion of the plenary session. So however we act, I feel more comfortable that this will get the attention of the full annual conference rather than it sliding through on a consent calendar. And I wanted to make sure everybody understood that dynamic of this conversation tonight.
Thank you for that clarification. And Adam, you confirm that that's correct, that nothing that's acted upon this soon can go, or this close to the annual conference session can go on the consent calendar. Is there further, go ahead. No, go ahead.
You're correct. That's
okay. Is there further discussion of AR 16? If you would support AR 16 and recommend it to the annual conference, please lift your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, we have 3 in favor, 15 opposed, 2 abstaining.
All right, it is not upheld, will not be recommended by the Legislative Assembly to the annual conference. Thank you. All right, we're moving right along. Good job, Fumile. Thank you very much. You were very patient waiting for your turn. We turn to AR 17. Who is our presenter?
I am. And I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of Action Request 17.
All right, this motion, is there a second? Jan has seconded it. It is before you for discussion. Seeing none, are you ready to vote? If you would recommend action request number 17 to the annual conference, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
Bishop, the vote was 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right, it is recommended to, action request 17 is recommended to the annual conference. And AR 18, who's our presenter?
I'm June. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of AR 18, creation of a cross-conference vitality commission.
Is there a second? I see Suzanne. Good job, Suzanne. It is seconded, and before you is the discussion. Seeing none, if you would recommend AR 18 to the annual conference, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
Bishop, the vote was 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right. Action request 18 is recommended to the annual conference. And we are just moving right along to AR 19. Who's our presenter?
Hi, this is Ria. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommends to the annual conference the adoption of Action Request 19, Racial Justice Strategy.
All right, is there a second? I see Amanda Gale's hand. It is seconded, it's properly before you. Is there discussion?
I have a
Ria, sure.
statement. So I was a part of this meeting and it wasn't disclosed in respect for others who didn't want to be named. However, I am so proud to have been a part of this conversation and am so proud to have my name stamped on this document. And it was a very wholesome, emotional, and authentic conversation. And I hope that that's how it is portrayed in front of everyone.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? All who would support, please lift a hand. All opposed, same sign. I don't know, the sky might fall without Mike's hand holding it up. Abstentions?
Bishop, the vote is 20 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
Action request 19 is recommended to the annual conference. And Rhea, thank you for your work on that. I was worried about the turnaround time on this. That work was done so quickly, but so late that it was great to see it when it finally came out. You all did good work. All right. Adam, are we finished?
I believe we are finished, Bishop.
My Lord, my Lord. So I have been using, and I use this, I think I used this with the clergy, the Oregon-Idaho clergy session, whenever that was. Was that a year ago or was it last week? Oh, it was last week. So I'm going to make you learn a cheer with me. Bishop Gregory Palmer from West Ohio taught us this at the Pittsburgh General Conference in whatever year that was. And it goes like this. It's from preschool. Jules Nielsen knows this and was part of the group that taught it to Bishop Palmer. Here it goes. Good job. Good job. Good job. Come on, those of you who know it. Good job.
Good job.
Good job. Good
Good
job.
job. Good job.
G-O-O-D-J-O-B. Good job. Good job. Boy, I just love what the cacophony that.
Carter knows it.
You've been really faithful. Yeah. You stayed on a half an hour longer than you were asked to stay. You've been very faithful and attentive to this work. And I do trust and believe that God will bless it and fix it if we messed it up. So let's be in prayer together. Gracious God, as the labors of this day draw to a close, we place our work in your open, receiving, shaping hands. Receive the words of our mouths, the meditations of our hearts, the work of this evening as an offering of our love. And if it is your will, use it to bless and not to curse the world. And now may the love of God embrace you and give you rest this night and raise you again in the morning to a new day with all of its blessings and possibilities.